Perhaps you are still in disbelief. This is America, and look how long we are living. Modern medicine must be doing something useful since we're living longer, right? So please ask yourself this question. How much has our life expectancy increased over the past 150 years? Americans have basically doubled their life expectancy from 40 years to 80 years. So far so good, right? Now please ask yourself, what percentage of the 40-year increase in life expectancy is attributable to modern medicine? I define modern medicine as having taken off during the 1960s, when especially American spending on healthcare exploded, almost exclusively driven by medical technology costs. Remarkably, only 7% of life expectancy gains result from this period of modern medicine. The belief that modern medicine is the main reason for our living longer is a great myth that has prevented us from asking the vital two questions we listed earlier, including, what is the best thing we can do to make our people healthier? And secondly, how to get the best health outcomes for the lowest cost. Are you still having a hard time believing that modern medicine has had such a small impact? Well, look at the next graph and notice how life expectancy was exploding from the 1860s moving forward, but then started leveling off after the 1960s. Now guess when antibiotics came along in this story of rising life expectancy. Even antibiotics get too much credit for how long we are living, because they came along well after the explosion in life expectancy. When did modern medicine show up on the scene? I already hinted at this, but it's quite another thing to see it on the graph and realize how small a role modern medicine has played in helping us live longer. It really came in almost after the fact. These next graphs make this concept even more obvious. You can clearly see that American spending as a percentage of the total economy, indicated on the lower graph, explodes after most of the life expectancy gains have already been achieved. And gains in life expectancy after the 1960s have much to do with the reduction in smoking, hypertension, and cholesterol levels, which are typically not dependent on sophisticated technology. This is what we mean by modern medicine is overrated. So for all the United States invests in healthcare, one might imagine that the Americans have something to show for it. At least they have better life expectancy than the other nations, or better access to healthcare or quality of life. Right? So where does the United States rank for life expectancy relative to the other richest nations of the world? Does it rank in the first, second, third, or fourth quarter of nations? Amazingly, the United States not only ranks in the bottom quarter of wealthy nations, it is actually the lowest of 30 wealthy nations with regards to life expectancy. So why is that? Many would argue that it's because we have a bigger population of immigrants and or poor folks, which brings down our numbers. Yet, we can quickly dismiss this explanation by noticing that the United States has plenty of relatively poor nations with comparable life expectancy, with the classic example being Cuba. Of course, the entire nation of Cuba is considered economically impoverished, so that excuse doesn't work for the United States. So guess how much Americans spend on healthcare every year per person, and compare this to how much the Cubans spend. The Cubans spend an astonishing 90 to 95% less than the Americans, who now spend $8,000 per year per person. Now this slide is further evidence that modern medicine is overrated, our third big concept. And in fact, this is a very important study by Dr. Fisher, based on decades of research at the Dartmouth Medical School, where they actually demonstrated that the greater the spending, the worse the health outcomes. Given what you have learned about how unintelligent and dangerous modern medicine is, this should not be a surprise, because of unproven medical care and complexity-related mistakes. Modern medicine is overrated is the big picture evidence saying that it is hard to justify the blind use of technology for healthcare. Most of our care is blind because we physicians have not been held accountable to a higher standard. In fact, there is also an astonishing amount of waste in the American healthcare system. This waste is attributable to a combination of needless care, bureaucracy, and fraud. so that the total waste in the healthcare system is between 50 to 70% of the healthcare dollar. The only one thing worse than socialized medicine is the broken free market medicine which the Americans have allowed to develop. In the second half of this presentation, we will discuss what this waste means and how to reverse it. So what does all this waste really mean for people in their day-to-day lives? Let's put some perspective on the 60 to 70% waste so you can understand why this can solve most of our nation's problems, not to mention transform your life. If 60% waste seems hard to believe, consider the following. We spend $2.4 trillion per year on healthcare in the United States. With 300 million people in this country, that translates to $8,000 per person per year spent on healthcare. If you reduce this by 60%, by eliminating the waste, we would spend $3,200 per year. Not surprisingly, the average yearly amount spent by all other wealthy nations is $3,500, the same as our spending minus the waste. Yet, they have better health outcomes than us. Americans have a horrific double whammy of skyrocketing spending with much worse outcomes, and now 60% waste seems quite plausible, right? We explain why this happened based on modern medicine being unintelligent, dangerous, and overrated, and there's one more major failing of modern medicine to go. Now, removing 60% waste from the $2.4 trillion spent equates to $1.4 trillion that we can recapture every year to substantially solve all of our nation's deficit, debt, and underinvestment problems, including problems with Social Security, education, infrastructure, research and development, job creation, and avoiding another economic crisis. This is how we save the American dream. Nothing but healthcare reform can do this for us. To summarize, if we want to avoid the riots that have consumed France, Greece, and the Middle East, and you want to avoid the Russian roulette bullets of a failed medical model, we must take back our money and invest it much more intelligently. By the way, the idea that Americans have better access to medical care than other socialized medicine nations, including the Canadians, is completely false. Even if you remove the 50 to 80 million people who are under or uninsured in the United States, Americans have the worst access to doctors of any of the developed nations, the worst access to hospital care, the worst ability to stay in the hospital, including after having a baby, as well as the worst ability to have same-day doctor visits. Please stop biting on stories of Canadians running across the border to get better health care, because overall that's a lie. Yes, we may have more interventions, but we know where that story often ends up. Also, what about Americans running across the border to get cheaper medications in Canada? So please stop making excuses for modern and American medicine, and let's start real healthcare innovation based on a truly intelligent healthcare conversation. Remarkably, we have not gotten to the scariest yet most exciting part of this presentation. So with that grueling run through the failings of modern and especially American medicine, how in the world is it possible that the worst is yet to come? Imagine you are struggling up a ladder to get to the other side of a wall because you believe the paradise of health, wealth, and happiness is on the other side. Of course, modern medicine is unintelligent, so the ladder doesn't work very well. And modern medicine is dangerous, so someone keeps trying to knock you off the ladder. But then, horror of horrors, you realize you were climbing the wrong wall. Instead of the paradise of health and wellness, you are greeted by the desert of chronic disease, including stroke, heart attacks, arthritis, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, cancer, and worse, reduced energy and creativity, reduced memory and mental function, worsened relationships, lost happiness, and diminished productivity. What in the world just happened? It turns out that the key to almost all disease is a chemical battle going on in your blood, in the walls of your blood vessels, and the cells that make up your body. You are basically living in a chemical soup that determines how well your brain and body will work. Now, this soup has largely been ignored by modern medicine. I call this chemical soup the chemical ecology, with an ecology being an environment where multiple factors are interacting with each other, as you can see in the upcoming slides. The bad news is that 95% of people are losing this battle, with consequences for literally every aspect of your life, including a shortening of life expectancy and the experience of much suffering from major disease. The good news is we know how to reverse this life destruction in a branch of medicine called functional medicine, as well as the branches of medicine such as alternative medicine, energy medicine, and integrative medicine, which combines the best of many different kinds of approaches to healthcare. Let's go back to Dad's situation with his coronary artery disease. Was there a way to reverse his heart problem by improving his chemical soup? The important cardiologist Dr. Dean Ornish made a discovery over 20 years ago that lifestyle interventions including improved diet, exercise, and group psychotherapy could reverse coronary artery disease. That was a huge discovery. His group produced a remarkable reduction in heart attack-like events and chest pain. By Dr. Ornish's estimates, life changes would make 80% of coronary interventions unnecessary, because improving your chemical soup is that powerful. Which would you have preferred for Dad? Improving his chemical soup, or going through that gruesome coronary intervention? Sadly, Dr. Ornish's findings were ignored for over 20 years, and the power of your chemical ecology applies to all areas of medicine. The top-to-bottom mishandling of Dad's heart problem incorporates all four major flaws of modern medicine. First, you have an expensive and dangerous medical intervention that has not been thoroughly studied nor proven to be more beneficial than harmful. Second, a complex healthcare system guarantees tremendous cost and danger just by engaging it, including problems with medication errors, infections, and medical injuries acquired during care. Third, we operated with a mistaken assumption that our technology, with all its sophistication, made it quite useful. And fourth, we ignored the most powerful and least expensive approach to any chronic problem such as artery disease, your own ability to heal. The four major flaws of modern medicine occur repeatedly, especially in the American healthcare system. I imagine this is quite frustrating or even maddening to have your loved ones so mistreated like Dad was.